In that case, I will call the meeting to order. And will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Davis. Present. Councilmember Hagenow.
Present.
Councilmember Kerr. Councilmember Kerr here. Councilmember Parnell.
Present.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Here.
Councilmember Thistad. Present. Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 7 members present.
Thank you. First item on the agenda, the public comment period. This is new for us. We passed this at the last council meeting, and it's an opportunity for the public to comment on any item that's going to be discussed on the agenda at this meeting. The public comment period prior to the council meeting, any topic can be discussed. But the purpose of this one is to be able to allow the public comment on any item on the agenda for the work session. Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak? Please step up to the microphone, state your name and your connection to where you live in Keystone.
Larry Press in River Lodge. So we're discussing noise ordinance, right? Am I directing?
Yes.
Okay.
A nuisance ordinance.
Nuisance. So from my experience, so at the current point, I got a $5,000 lawsuit against neighbors that won't put quiet closing doors, and I've measured their decibel level, and it exceeds what, the state, the county, and maybe the city will consider the allowable level. So, and the reason is because the county wouldn't enforce anything. So you call in their short-term rental hotline, and then, okay, go there, they tell the owner, and then nothing changes, because there's no fine. And it shows that they're supposed to be fined. You'd think after a certain point they would fine, and money, to the people who are running the business would work. But so the point is there needs to be enforcement when there's problems, and not just a bunch of ordinances or statutes, and then you blow it off. So, otherwise, the people who live here are taking the brunt of the businesses. A lot of the people don't live, they're all over the country, and they're just a business trying to make money. They don't care about the people who live here in general. But, so just letting you know, please get some enforcement. $100, gets their eye. $250, it says to start at $250, maybe 100 would work. But otherwise, they don't notice, and they're not forced to go to court. This has been dragging out 3 months. So.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there any other comments? Is there anyone online who would like to make a comment? All right, in that case, the public comment period is now closed, and the first item is the discussion of the town financials. With that, I'll turn it over to our town manager.
Okay, I'd like to apologize to everyone for not being there, but trust me,
Can you
the
raise the
mayor's.
volume up?
John, could you try talking again and see if we can hear you better?
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
I'd like to apologize for not being there, but the mayor saw me. He can vouch that none of you want to be in a room with me right now. So these are our finances through the end of November. As you can see, we have a very healthy fund balance still, continuing to grow. We actually just got our November sales tax numbers, and they were 19,000 above our projected numbers. And we're expecting a strong December to come in too. Our new financial director will actually be starting her job tomorrow. So she'll be giving these reports at the next meeting with much more detail and information. So I'll go through our finances here. First, we'll talk about our revenue. As you can see, we still have some significant monies we need to get from the county highway users tax fund, specific ownership tax, auto ownership tax, the nicotine tax. Everyone signed on to the IGA, so we should be getting that disbursement very soon. The treasurer and I will be putting together all the evidence we need to get the other funds from the county. So hopefully next meeting we'll have some good news about those tax numbers for you. Building permits, as we've discussed every time, because of the way the numbers were budgeted and the discrepancy in the way they were collected, the fact that it's a negative $115,000 is offset by the expense we would have paid to the county. The county just collected the fees and then paid us our share of it instead. Short-term rental licenses, there's a slight discrepancy, but as I said, this is only through the end of November. We still have some late payments that have come in, and that number should be close to our projected number by the time we come with next month's financials. We'll scroll through some slight discrepancies in general expenditures, nothing outrageous, nothing that really sticks out. All of our services, administrative, community development, we're all below budgeted numbers on pretty much every aspect in every one of those. If you go down to line 124, you'll see $141,000 discrepancy on building permits inspections. That's what I was talking about would be offset by our lack of revenue up above. So we're actually ahead of the game on that even a little bit. Public Works, we had to get some work done that we didn't have any road maintenance budgeted, but we had to repair the East Keystone Road Bridge. That's where those discrepancies are. Public safety, nothing was budgeted, but we've been paying for the sheriff's department to provide services for us. As we keep going through, we have a lot of savings in just facility, office setup, staff hiring expense, IT infrastructure. It was just cheaper to do a lot of the things than we budgeted for. Always better to budget for the unexpected and then not have to pay for it. And as once again, our only real big discrepancies in spending would be legal, and it takes a lot of legal advice to set up a town, and every dime spent there has been well worth it, and the law enforcement where nothing was budgeted for. Are there any questions about any of the items?
Councilmember Sullivan.
Yeah, a question, John. I believe we said that we were going to join the, what's it called, 123 housing project. Is that money that would be coming in? How does that work and where will that show up?
Okay, that we will apply for Prop 123 grants. We're going to be applying for a planning grant actually in the next month or so. And that will show it. We haven't gotten anything from that yet because we haven't applied for the grant yet. We haven't, the grant cycle wasn't open in time for us. We didn't have our ducks in a row to apply for the grant. the next grant cycle is opening up in a couple weeks, and we'll be applying for a planning grant specifically to address the 6-acre parcel where the town hall is located. Our other housing planning is already wrapped into our DOLA grant that we got for the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Councilmember Davis?
I'm just curious, why 202 says Tabor restricted funds? I don't understand.
Tabor requires all towns to keep a reserve. I think it's a 3% operations reserve, or I'm not exactly sure of the number. But that's what that is. That's restricted. We cannot spend that money. We have to keep it as a reserve due to Tabor. It's not really an issue. We clearly have the money. We never expect our reserves to dip down anywhere near that level, but it has to be called out in our financials and our budgets.
Thank you, I just didn't know what that meant.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I guess I have one other financial, council members, you may have noticed that you accidentally received a 3% cost of living increase in your pay. We will be fixing that, and you're going to have to pay it back out of your next paycheck. I'm sorry about that. So all the employees received their 3% cost of living. Council and myself did not at the beginning of the year. The employees will be addressed for merit increases as their anniversaries come up.
With that good news, are there any other questions? All right, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the discussion of the IGA with the town of Dillon for the Joint Law Enforcement Agency. And again, I'll turn it back to the town manager.
So we've spent a lot of time, a lot of negotiations with the town of Dillon to get this IGA done. They're actually workshopping it at their meeting this evening too. The IGA that staff and the attorneys have agreed to will, if we'll be bringing it up at the regular meeting for approval on January 28th, and so will the town of Dillon. It will be effective from February 1st, 2025 through December 31st of 2027, and automatically will renew for an additional 3-year term. Unless terminated, there's a 6-month termination notice. There's a ramp-up period. Even though it's effective February 1st, we won't expect full joint police coverage until June 1st. And actually, my brain's a little fuzzy, so I'm going to ask our attorney if she can go into more of the details in the IGA for you, if that's okay, Jennifer.
Yes, definitely. So just to start this out from where John left it, it is a 3-year term. Dillon will essentially serve as the managing agency and the employer for all personnel. The town does retain authority for ratifying the decisions for hiring the police chief, and that's in accordance with the town's home rule charter. The police department will provide 24/7 law enforcement services to the town, again, Those would be starting June 1. Keystone can offer additional benefits above and beyond what is offered by the town of Dillon. However, those would need to be approved by the town council before those benefits could be offered. For 2025, the budget is, for the cost of this contract is a little bit over $1 million. That would be payable in equal monthly installments to Dillon. And that's consistent with the budget that you all approved for 2025. Future years, Dillon would come to the town with its law enforcement budget. And essentially, there would be discussion about what Keystone's share of that budget would be. And that is capped at 33% unless there's a separate agreement. The contract also allows for reconciliation of expenses in the following year. The police vehicles and equipment are owned, maintained, and replaced by Dillon. There can be the costs are shared for those vehicles through the budget. Should Keystone purchase a vehicle separately or through future budgets, that would be identified and Keystone would retain that asset if the IGA were terminated.
Sorry, I wanted to ask a question of the capital. Because of replacement of capital, is there, it's at their discretion, Dillon folks, but that requires that we would be responsible for our portion of the capital. And this is along this line, but it also goes into insurance. How does this map against what we think is our current budget? Is that kind of thing covered in our budget? And how do we make a determination? They said they want to replace the fleet every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking, well, gosh, 4 years. I mean, how does that work in particular with our budget?
Well, there would be, that's not really identified in the contract. So there would have to be future discussions as to how the vehicles would be, you know, what the budget is for that, when vehicles would be purchased. It's not fleshed out in the agreement.
Well, is there a sense, I mean, are we obligated that we make the decision to do it? Or was that in there? I couldn't find it if it's mutual discussion or mutual agreement.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to see.
If I may say, I can kind of weigh in on this a little bit. Any decisions like that will be made really jointly between the two towns. It's, as I said, we're not contracting here. We're setting up a joint police force. So Dillon could decide they want to replace it every 2 years. We could decide that that's unacceptable every 4 years. And to tell the truth, if a decision like that happens, it might call for termination of the agreement after 6 months if we find ourselves at a budget impasse with the town of Dillon on how we want to fund the police department going forward. So this is something like that is a matter of trust that we will work it out. We will discuss it. They can't make that unilateral decision without us, but we also can't make the unilateral decision to go every 2 years without them. So this is something that's going to require a lot of communication between the towns and a lot of faith that the other parties are acting in good faith, which I believe they will be. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll have to stand up our own police department or find a different solution. And I'd also like to, talking about capital investments, I know that Dylan and the police department currently are looking at new facilities.
That's my next question.
Yeah, that's not in this IGA at all. Any new facility agreement would be subject to a separate IGA between both parties. I've already broached the idea that we're going to be in the process of purchasing a very large building, and a big hunk of this building could be used as the police department if necessary. Everything's on the board in that case, but it's a matter of a separate IGA. Dylan can go ahead and build a new police department. We're not obligated to contribute to that building unless we agree to it.
Valerie?
So referencing an article that was in the Summit Daily in December, they did indicate that in their budget, there was a $200,000 line in Dylan's budget for facility analysis, which is what I believe you're referring to. And I guess, given the fact that we have agreed to have a joint department, how, if at all, does Keystone factor into that joint, or that analysis for a new facility? And I guess I'm wondering if we're going to stay apprised of what the details and criteria are in that analysis and how that impacts our agreement.
As I said, they just budgeted the money. They're not spending it yet. We'll be starting negotiations on an IGA for facility assessment, facility replacement. It's all really on the table at this point right now. Nothing will be done without our participation or cooperation. We will be bringing a separate facilities agreement to you at some point in the future.
Dan?
Sorry, just two more. One just explanation. How does we 6-month notice, as you mentioned, if we want to get out of that, but also you can get out of it if it's not budgeted. Do those two things sync up?
Yeah, I mean, we have to do that. All of our contracts have the non-appropriation clause, is that if the town doesn't budget it for it, then it's no longer in existence. So, we'd probably have to work that out as far as how that would work if, say, for example, there was a December budget that was approved and there was no law enforcement budget. I mean, likely there would have been conversations well in advance of that decision. And so again, it would have to be probably something that would be worked out. The 6 months is really to Keystone's advantage in that we don't want to be in a position where we're given notice that Dylan is no longer providing law enforcement services, and then we have a month to stand at the police department or to find somebody else.
So right now, they're really not synced up. We'll just have to address that, which I understand. The second last question, I promise. In there, it talks about a lot of insurance requirements that we'll have. I mean, they're typical of police. Are those covered under our current,
Yes.
within our current budget?
Yes.
I couldn't tell.
Well, yeah, they're consistent with our current insurance coverages.
Okay.
Yeah, on the subject of insurance, I have one question. In here, we talk about that the town would be responsible for insuring town vehicles, but all the vehicles that we would be purchasing with capital would actually be owned by the town of Dillon. So, does that really apply? Well, why is that language in here if all the vehicles are owned by, are actually on the books of Dillon?
Well, should there be a Keystone vehicle?
All right. So you're looking ahead to say if Keystone were to purchase our own police vehicle?
Right. then it would need to be under our insurance.
All right. But as the agreement starts, we would not have any Keystone police vehicles. Am I
That's
correct?
what I understand. Is that correct, John?
Yes, that's my understanding. Everything would be technically owned and insured by the town of Dillon. However, we would be paying our proportional share of those insurance costs because they're wrapped into the law enforcement budget. So,
Gretchen?
So, I know that this is not the only joint police force that's in the state. This is a pretty standard IGA, and would you have any concerns?
I mean, there really aren't too many other joint police departments in the state. Fraser and Winter Park are the only other joint police department that I understand. There are IGAs in which the sheriff's office provides law enforcement services to municipalities. This IGA is actually, in my opinion, I think it's a lot better than the IGA between Winter Park and Fraser, because we took that as a starting point and we expanded on it.
Any concerns?
No, I don't have any concerns. As John mentioned, there are some points that are going to, are a matter of trust and working forward together, and trying to reach agreement on it, such as, budgeting issues. That's the only thing, but like I said, I don't have a concern about it. You can always come back to, and if there are points that need to be fleshed out a little bit, we can always come back and make amendments.
Sure.
John, do we know the current budget for the Dillon Annual Police Force?
I don't have the exact numbers right now. It's right around $2 million, just over $2 million. This would, yeah, well, it's 3 million if actually it's approximately 3 million. 2 million budgeted out of Dillon and $1 million from us. So
I believe the last time I looked at a number for the Dillon Police Department for this last year, 2024, I think it was about $2.6 million for the police department. I haven't looked at what 25 is. That's just a recollection. Did you see something, Valerie?
Well, I don't know how specific Carol's asking, but in the latest article in the Daily, it said that Dillon's budget had 1.1 million earmarked for Dillon to provide law enforcement services specifically in Keystone.
Yeah.
But I don't know what their total budget is, but that gives you a point of reference for what their expenditures are for Keystone.
Yeah.
Kind of going backwards, yeah, but that is one of the reasons I'm asking that question, Valerie. I appreciate you bringing it up, because the Dillon town budget just set aside $1.1 million to help stand up this police force. Whereas we're coming up with 1.1, and I'm confused about those two sets of numbers.
I believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the 1.1 that they have set aside, the revenue that they would get for that is the money that we have budgeted in our side to go into it. So they have to budget 1.1, but that's on the expense side. You have an income side
Okay,
that we're contributing to.
okay, that makes more sense.
that's correct.
In that case,
That's correct.
can I understand the timing? If this IGA were going into effect on the 1st of February, but they're not going to be fully operational, in this document, it says 1 July. I think.
June 1.
June 1, okay, 1 June. So February, March, April, May, 4 months for them to hire new police officers, get new vehicles, all of that is understandable. We have to give 30 days notice to the sheriff. So my question is, at what point do we start paying?
We will start paying right away because they're going to be incurring the expenses in the hiring, the training, the purchasing of equipment. So that's why it goes into effect February 1st, even though it's not fully operational till June 1st.
What are the pros and cons of determining now that we'll sign this IGA in the 1st of March and they will initiate coverage, not full, but they will initiate it, and we give the sheriff's office 30 days notice? It seems to me that we'll be double tapping, we'll be paying two police forces for a while.
We will be paying two police forces for a little while. We
So
will be just
what period is that?
from February 1st until probably until June 1st. Hopefully we can give the sheriffs, hopefully they'll be ready to ramp up before June 1st. We picked a date that we were 100% certain they could be 100% operational. So when these are approved, they're going to try to ramp it up and get it into effect as soon as possible. And once Cale has a better grasp of when that'll be, we'll give the sheriff his notice, and that will be it. Some things will be able to take effect immediately, but full coverage won't happen until June 1st. So we'll still need to be ensured that we have coverage. I'll have a better answer for you. I'll talk to Cale about that, and I'll have a better answer for you at our next meeting.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, we're going to be paying two different police entities for 4 months, February, March, April, May. And at some time during that period, not sure when it would, but Dylan might start doing some coverage. And
Things
that
like
would have to be coordinated with the sheriff's office between those two police operations.
that is correct. That is correct. Things like accident coverage, investigative services, those things they could probably start doing for us right away. And those are services actually that the sheriff's department they don't provide accident coverage, and the state patrol does. And state patrol in our district is right now only 50% staffed. That's why it's so long to get someone to, if you have an accident on Highway 6 in Keystone, you can be out there for a long time before you get a response. Investigative services, if there's things like that, that's an additional cost under our current IGA. Town of Dillon could probably take that right now. But as I said, I'll just double check our time schedule and have a much more detailed answer for you at our next meeting.
I appreciate that. I was also going to ask about the insurance because it seemed to be, there were several references about us covering our own employees, social security, et cetera, covering our own vehicle insurance. And yet the rest of this document suggests that both employees and vehicles will be wholly owned by Dillon. Yes, do I understand that correctly?
Right, so if there are no employees or no vehicles, there's no insurance coverage.
Which is kind of weird that it's
allowed for.
It's a if
Yes,
so then.
exactly.
Okay. On the same line of if so then, any control of the budget would merely be us consulting and advising that they're looking at something more than we are prepared to pay our 1/3 for? Should I restate?
Yeah, the budget, as I said, this is a matter of trust and negotiation on the police budget. The town manager of Dillon and I the police chief will prepare his budget, present it to both of us. earlier in the year, and then we'll sit down together and go over the budget and determine where we stand on the budget. It's going to be back and forth, give and take. My belief is that this won't necessarily be an issue. It could become an issue, in which case, as I said, what we'd have to do is end the joint police force and stand up our own force or find some other solution. But I don't necessarily see a point where Dylan is going to be driving for higher police expenditures when we're not supportive of that. We both have interest in saving our taxpayers' money and not spending it frivolously.
Thanks, John. I appreciate all those discussions.
John?
Thank you very much. So I have two questions, specifically for the town manager from your previous joint force. Was there any lessons learned that you incorporated into this IGA that we should be aware of?
You know, it's very interesting when, as our attorney said, we started out with the agreement they used in Winter Park Fraser, and I feel we really improved it. There were never really any problems that I witnessed in Winter Park or Fraser. I think the one key is you have to have a good police chief who communicates well with both town councils and both town managers.
Amazing, thank you. And then I had a second question. It seems like Councilman Kerr has identified a concerning aspect about the 4 months of double pay. Is there a potential for real versus contracted cost? And what I mean by that is if the Dillon Police Department is able to hire all the staff, get all the equipment on day one of the first month, awesome. We'll pay for that. And that'd be really, really awesome recruiting if you're able to do that. But we pay for the full cost of the contract. But let's say they're having trouble procuring the vehicles, they're not getting staff, and on May 31st, they get all that. And so really 4 months of not incurring the cost to Dillon with those expenditures. Is there the possibility of doing like a real cost versus a contract cost, if that makes sense?
You know, it would, as I said, the police chief's intention is to get this ramped up as quickly as possible. If nothing is happening for 4 months, there's going to be some serious discussions happening. To do that type of thing, we would have to go back and renegotiate the IGA. The problem with assigning a real cost is how do you do that? There's a lot of that's why we didn't divide it by calls or the apportionment by calls or by things like that, because there are things that it's hard to put a value on. For instance, we have the National Brotherhood of Skiers coming next month, and I expect the Dillon Police to be active in the safety and patrolling of that event. So there will be a significant number of crash responses from them. We don't know where investigative services will be, and you know, you have to budget for the unexpected, and it's hard. The police department would have a hard time operating if they don't know what their expected funds are until after the money's already spent. So they have to be assured that the money's there if they need it. And
I think to put something in perspective, when we're talking about the 4 month potentially overlap, we're talking about probably a maximum of $60,000 total. It's about between $10,000 and $15,000 a month, depending on the average call volume for the sheriff to provide the support we're currently getting.
Mr. Mayor, what is the proportion that would be paid if we were considering services not received from Dylan if they don't stand up for 4 months?
What do you mean?
So you said $60,000 if we were paid for the sheriff for 4 months. Okay, so we pay them $60,000 to cover 4 months. If during those 4 months, there's not service from Dylan, what portion are we paying, how much are we paying for that?
Are you asking of the IGA, right? If it's about $1 million we're paying for the year, how much does that 4 months cost us?
You've hit the point that I'm trying to make here, is that this is double pay and it's not fair to only consider the lowest of those two things. We're not talking about necessarily $60,000, that's the bright and shiny view. The very negative view is we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I understand the difficulty with John's point. It's a good idea. Okay, can we maybe look at a different alternative, proration of services provided, or something like binding our taxpayers to cover both departments for 4 months blanket, when maybe 1 day is needed, maybe 1 month is needed, maybe 4 months is needed, but we're just going to default to paying 4 months to both. Seems quite a lot to swallow.
And I just want to be clear, I am fully supportive of paying both if that is the operational expense incurred by Dylan, right? I don't think that we should go into trying to nickel and dime Dylan, but I don't think Dylan should anticipate 4 months of double pay.
Can I make a comment related to this?
Yes, go ahead.
So there is one contract provision that could account for some adjustment here, and that's a reconciliation provision. So each year, the following year, so 2026, there will be a reconciliation where we'll look at the police department's expenditures and potential reimbursement to Keystone. And that is reconciled against Keystone's percentage apportionment. So it doesn't look at what services were necessarily provided to Keystone, but it looks at what were the expenditures in 2025, and if the expenditures do not line up with the budget amount, then Keystone would receive a percentage back based on what Keystone's budget was. And the other thing I wanted to just share, just for some context, is it is typical with these law enforcement agreements that there is going to be some double coverage or a ramp up period, just because it's difficult, very difficult to get the folks hired and trained. And the training is really the key part. Training takes a long time for police officers. So you're paying for their salaries and not necessarily able to use them as officers. So that's an expense.
And it's not just the salary cost, it's the cost to train the officers, the cost to outfit the officers, and bring them on board. Frankly, I find 4 months a fairly aggressive schedule to be able to bring on 4 law enforcement officers. I've had a police department working for me in the past, and hiring and training is probably really training is one of the major costs that we have. See, I believe the Dillon Police Chief's in the audience. And you've heard our concerns, Cale, regarding transition period and that startup. Could I ask you, if this probably isn't fair, but could I ask you to come up and address how you envision that 4 month startup period to occur?
Sure. Great discussion, great questions. On, not on?
Is the mic on?
It's not being here.
It's not green.
So you have to push the button. It should go green.
Green.
And then if you're not volume, there's a little knob, you can turn the knob.
Sure.
I-
Great discussion, first of all, great questions. The 4-month ramp up period, right, there's a lot of things that need to happen, that you may or may not be aware of. I agree with you, onboarding cops, just from a training aspect, 16 weeks is our basic FTO program, so it does take time. Some other things to consider that really haven't been talked about is you as a new town don't exist. Working with CBI, you need certain things. You need to be recognized with an ORI. I think that process already started. Clearly we will finish that. Trying to establish what your footprint and hopefully in the very near future, what our footprint looks like from a records management standpoint, from a Summit County communication standpoint. There's a lot of work that needs to be done fairly quickly. 4 months is not necessarily a long time, but there's been a lot of work that's gone into this over the last year and a half. Not only from the attorneys, which has just been outstanding, from your attorney and our attorney, because there is not a lot of IGAs out there that are doing this. Right? So clearly working through everything from establishing the footprint, rebranding, which, we've been very transparent about. Our rebranding is going to be very, well, we are not the flashiest. We don't choose to be, we don't spend our money that way. We're fairly conservative with that. When you look at even what our cars look at today, Dylan in black letters in the top, police, Keystone's going to go right on the bottom if you guys choose to do that. Clearly, there's just different uniforms. We are going to develop a patch that is inclusive of both ends. I think it's important because you're investing in a police department and you need to have something that says your name on it that you're proud of, just like our community is right now. So there's a lot that goes into that. The 4-month portion of that, we picked June 1st because we think that it is doable. Because there is a lot of work that needs to be done in that. From a capital perspective, like the car situation, we're absorbing a lot of that now. If we ordered a car for, this IGA specifically, we're still waiting for cars to be ordered in 2023. So that is stuff that we're going to absorb on the front end of that, because we're going to absorb a lot. You're going to contribute a lot over the course of time. I would never mislead this council in any sort of way. Like, this is not a one and done type of investment, right? So you're going to put in what the number is for the IGA of that. I'm telling you now, next year, we're going to continue to build on that. But we're going to do it intelligently, right? The first thing I'm going to come back for in the budget that you're going to need to allocate for next year, CSO positions, more officers, supervisor. Okay, it's already laid out. So it's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be a continuous investment, trying to meet the needs of both communities. The budgets will be prepared. Not only will they get presented to you, you'll have to allocate them, through your budget process. So, if there's issues or concerns or what it looks like, or just the affordability, that's one of, I think, the positive things about an IGA like this. The long-term sustainability of 2 smaller towns, you're going to get bigger bang for your buck, right? There's going to be more officers on duty. The other piece about that, and I appreciate the question about, coverage in the next 4 months of that. Our police department is here a lot now. So, having the sheriff's office under contract and us trying to do what we need to do, I think is, the time allotment, I think, is appropriate. I wish we could do it a better way where it's turnkey of that, but there's a lot of things to do in that time period. I'm very confident that we will be ready to go by June 1st if everybody, timing is of the essence, right? You're talking about it today, it's going on the 28th. Clearly, we are specifically waiting for, either sign into the agreement or not. If you don't, Clearly, we have other things that we would proceed a certain way, but if we do, there's gonna be things that get set in motion on that day. So a lot of it has already been planned out. Like I said, the timing piece of it, I do think is important. Clearly, we don't want any coverage gaps. That's the safest way to do that. You know, they've been providing service here under contract since you became the town. You know, as we figure out, a lot of things that I do think, that I think are kind of one-off kind of things, just as working through the agreement. You know, it's our intention to provide, you with the police department, I say we're gonna. So. Any other specific questions? I know that there was a lot of other stuff that got addressed, and I think your town manager did a great job discussing some of those points, but if there's any pointed towards me directly, clearly that's what I'm here to.
Sharon?
I just want to thank Chief Osborne for his on-the-spot, thorough, and thoughtful answer.
Carol?
I'm glad you're here. I am concerned to make sure that we have a good handoff between the sheriff and you. I certainly understand the startup costs, and we are walking into this with a lot of hope. But you know, as well as we, that spelling it all out helps prevent miscommunication and lack and distrust in the future. So 2 quick questions. One is, can you answer the question about your current annual budget?
Current operating for 2024 was, I want to say in totality, it was approaching 3, but I can give you that number before.
No, that's good enough. But when you specify operating, what are you not including?
I'm sorry.
You specify your operating budget. Is there some other monies that are not included in that?
Capital,
Okay, got it.
yeah, capital and operating are split.
I did have a question about the Keystone leadership will not have access to any records other than those associated with Keystone. So I would assume that would go both ways, but I'm wondering if it's truly a joint force, why our town manager couldn't have access if the Dillon manager does. For example, if nothing else, we would want to be able to compare how calls were responded to, et cetera. Can you explain that part of this agreement?
Let me make sure I'm hearing your question appropriately. The fact of the matter is, would you as a board have access into?
No, town manager.
Town manager would have access into the data sets and whatnot from the police department?
Well, there's something in here that specifies that he could only be looking at anything to do with Keystone calls.
No, we'll share that data. In fact, I'll be presenting that usually on a monthly.
I would hope so, because that's a good way for us to understand where that budget is being spent. So maybe we can readdress that section.
It doesn't specifically say what you said it stated. It doesn't say we don't have access to Dillon information. It says that we do have access to the Keystone.
My point is, if it's truly joint, why wouldn't we have access to all, not just Keystone? I understand we're ensuring access to Keystone, but a joint force and joint leadership would have access to all.
What paragraph are you talking about?
312.
Do you see where the confusion can be in this? If we might just be able to agree with Dylan that there's a small clause that should the town manager for Keystone like to review the method in the ways that the police department responds to calls in the towns, maybe we could add some kind of notion. And I don't think that, from what I'm reading, I don't think it's malicious, but I can understand the concern.
Not considering anything malicious. Thank you for making sure we identify that. My concern is to ensure that this is not a joint force in name only. That in fact, we have a level of control and understanding of what's going on that a joint force would have between two town managers. And you seem to be confused what we're talking about.
No, I just wanted to make sure that I'm talking about the same thing, because when he makes the comment of that, of like how we respond to calls, I want to make sure that there's a difference of how we handle each appropriate call, as opposed to like the numbers and the data.
I don't know.
Corrected.
I've never had oversight over a police, so I'm coming from a point of not knowing. But when it says that Keystone shall have access to all police records for law enforcement activities performed in Keystone, it just doesn't sound like joint.
Yeah, so in essence, the town manager would have access into our records management system for our daily duties of any call that we come to in Keystone. You're getting both of them.
There you go.
And if you look publicly, like any report that I do to our council now has calls for service, numbers. Sometimes we break it down if we have certain issues, things like that.
Okay. Intent is more than name only. That's it. More than brand. Thank you.
Gretchen?
We received the report from the sheriff's office, with this packet. And I don't see anything from any other town or any other part of the unincorporated county. So I don't think I think at this point, we are receiving only information about Keystone. And that has not been a problem since we started this town. So I think that's something to consider, number one. Number two, when we told people that we were going to become a town, one of the issues was we wanted enhanced law enforcement. And the sheriff has refused any additional law enforcement. So I think that's something we need to remember that we promised our citizens. And thank you.
Any other questions? John?
And forgive my ignorance on the understanding of how this occurs, but let's say for mutual aid, a Dillon and police officer responds to the town of Keystone for a call. Is there any kind of cost sharing or cost reallocation on the back end?
And you're discussing current practice.
Current practice. No, okay. My next point.
No, for the people that are on video.
Thank you. And thank you again for being here and answering our questions.
In other words, John, that I believe Dylan probably provides first responder to what, close to half the calls in Keystone at least. Am I correct?
I don't know the exact number because I'm not looking at that number on a monthly basis.
But it's a fairly high percentage.
It is a high percentage, and there's a couple of reasons of why that is.
Understand. So as a result, they get no reimbursement for the sheriff for the support we're providing to them.
And that's what I'm trying to get at, right? Is that to justify these 4 months of overlap, I think that there are a few avenues we can definitely share with our constituents. And that's certainly one of them.
Sure, and just kind of a little background, like a philosophical approach, right? It's the right thing to do, first of all, right? And why some of that happens is closest car dispatching, right? If an organization or response organization stays on the other side of the county, the dispatch center would pick the next closest car, which a lot of times is us. The trick that will be in the future, right? Everybody's getting busier and busier and busier, right? So if they're on that side of the county, our next closest car really could end up being Soderburn, for example, or Frisco. So we take that really seriously, what that mutual aid package looks like. Our cars will go where people need that car to go. We don't recover any cost sharing, anything like that. But I will say that the impetus of why this IGA is the way it is right now, we spend a lot of time. And honestly, I just think naturally this side of the county, with us being as close as we are, clearly we have significant interest that mirror each other. So a lot of that actually drove the early discussions with the mayor and I a very long time ago at this point, but a lot has changed since then. So, but a lot of motivation with that just hasn't. So we have a lot of really similar issues. Topography is a really big thing. So that's why you've seen a lot of our cars out is the closest car dispatch. And I will say in the next probably year, there's going to be a comprehensive study, more along the lines of a staffing study that'll be county-wide of that. And it'll be interesting to see what the results come up as far as staffing levels, numbers, what side of the county people are on. If you set it up in the districts, there's different ways strategically that you can look at that. It'll be interesting to see what that drives, coverage on this side. And this is kind of unique too, because, Keystone being a town here, there's still unincorporated sections that are up the road, up and pass, on the road. And actually even on Mountain itself, because that's still unincorporated as well, which is probably the other short service extensions.
Any other question? Chief, Carol?
Not a question, and I think probably Ken's gonna say the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for standing up, coming up here and asking some of our questions so that we can see what's in your head or hear it. Because as John pointed out, it's gonna depend a lot on how well you two work things out, so I appreciate that.
I don't disagree with the town manager. Communication is always probably one of the hardest things. It may be complicated. I hope to see you all quite frequently. However, it's really going to depend on, why I bought Sergeant John Smith in here the first time that I came. You're going to hopefully get to know all of our staff. I'm not that important, so other people in our department may represent. If I'm not available, if I'm out of town, if we have other things going on, but trying to balance out the priorities of that is going to be challenging. The great thing is there's two great town managers in that mix. Clearly communication, even between the attorneys and the town managers, I thought was quite refreshing. So.
Are there any other comments? All right, Chief, again, I'd like to thank you for being here, seeing you in the audience. I thought this was a golden opportunity to be able to have you address the uncertainties of the transition period, how we'll work together. I think you're absolutely correct. As our town manager and our town attorney have indicated, communication in any partnership like this is going to be absolutely critical. And it's going to be involved give and take as we go forward. It's going to be, when we talk about a budget, I think we have to keep in mind this is a joint budget. This isn't a unilateral Dillon budget or a Keystone budget before any budget finally comes forward. There's going to be a meeting of the minds of that first with our town managers, and then they'll be responsible for bringing that to the councils, and hopefully then you would be involved with that to assess the risk and the cost associated with any budget that comes forward. So again, thank you very much for being here. We didn't ask you to be here, but I feel very serendipitous that you were here. Are there any other comments from anybody? Now I'll go back to the real question that we have. Were there any changes that the council would like to see in the language of the draft AGAs we have? John?
The only, back to, Carol's point about the record management, I really would like to see that polished up a little bit. Maybe in the sense of, law enforcement activities performed by the Keystone Village Police Force or things like that, to specify that it's, records for the police department, not necessarily records specifically.
Well, let me ask a question of the town attorney. On paragraph 312, the way I've interpreted 312 is a little differently than other folks have interpreted it. I look at that as really a question of who owns the records. And Dillon, by statute, owns the records for the town of Dillon. Keystone owns the records for the town of Keystone. Am I correct in that interpretation? Is that a right interpretation or not?
I think that the way it's drafted, I would say, that Keystone definitely has access to activities that occur in Keystone. The records custodian is going to be the person who is the person that owns the records. In practice, I have a lot of questions as to whether these records would be something that the town manager would want to see in any event. I mean, the town manager doesn't get involved in individual police situations, police reports. And so the records that I'm hearing you want to see are more call logs, those types of things that would not necessarily be police department records. They're data and information about how the police department operates.
I agree with everything you said, which begs the question, what are we specifying? That the Keystone town manager would be able to look only at Keystone. Are we going to specify the same thing for Dillon's manager? I don't even know why that paragraph is there. Other than to suggest that Dillon will have responsibility for records maintenance. And and those records are available to town managers as necessary. This goes to the concept of joint as opposed to contract for certain services.
I understand everything that you're saying. I don't know that a change is necessarily warranted. I think this is something where the parties will work together to figure out. I mean, they're not really going to need Dillon record to look at individual police department records. If there's an incident in Keystone, that's why the Keystone town manager should have access. If there's an incident that could potentially rise to the level of some liability, some, a public relations issue, then yes, that should be something that the Keystone manager should have access to.
Okay, it's a matter of interpretation. I'll leave it there.
Let me ask a question. Would it resolve the issue if we put a similar sentence in there that said the Dillon town manager will have access to all the Dillon records?
I don't know that it's necessary, but we could add it.
I mean,
Certainly.
I'm not convinced it is either, but let me ask a question of the council. I need a thumbs up or thumbs down. Do we want to make a change? Do we want to request a change in the language, paragraph 312? Thumbs up if you would like to, thumbs down if you don't. All right, no change. Any other changes that you would like to consider? And I guess you have your guidance to go forward. And
Nice piece of work.
it's a great piece of work by all involved. I know when I left this process back in about June time period, a lot of work's been done, and you guys, the chief, town manager, our town attorney have done a remarkable job. All right, moving on, the next item on the agenda is the discussion of the nuisance ordinance.
Okay.
Over to town manager again.
Okay, this is our third workshop on the nuisance ordinance. I've taken all of the comments made the last two discussions and actually drafted a formal ordinance that we can consider adopting if we're good with anything in it, with everything in it. I'm sorry. There are things I've added that you haven't seen before. The most important part, I think, is the enforcement procedures, and those are the first. Oh, I'm not exactly sure how many sections, but I just mirrored the enforcement provisions from the Dillon Town Code. That way, our police department and code enforcement officers won't have to figure out how to do things based on which town they're in. And these enforcement provisions are pretty standard boilerplate across many nuisance ordinances anyways. So those would be sections 1 through, I'm scrolling down here, I'm sorry about this. Looks like 1 through section 20 is all about the enforcement provisions and abatement provisions and the allowances for the town to go in and abate a nuisance if necessary. From there on, we define the nuisances as before. We have our basic boilerplate, section 21 A through G, trying to define what a nuisance is, including things that are not necessarily identified in here, but have been declared nuisances by other state courts or statutes are known as such in common law. That's a pretty broad brush, but it works pretty well. And then in section 22, we get to the meat of our nuisance ordinance, and that's where we start defining specific nuisances that we have specific concerns about. And I'll go through these one at a time, and we'll try to pound out any changes we need to be made before we bring it in. I discussed earlier with the mayor, I had contemplated putting in wildfire mitigation type issues in the nuisance code. And I actually, after reviewing a whole bunch of different wildfire codes and nuisance codes, decided that that would probably best be served as its own section in our code, given the resources that can be brought to bear, the money that can be brought in from outside sources to help pay for wildfire mitigation.
Excuse me, Valerie?
Oh, I'm sorry, this is Valerie. I just wanted to ask you a quick question along those lines. When you're talking about the wildfire nuisance code, are you referring to like refuse and stacked wood and things that might end up being a wildfire danger, or what are you referring to?
Well, I have that in the code. I'm more referring to like dead trees, things like that, clearance around the residence, things which there's county and state funds for, fire district funds for. Everything else in the nuisance code, the owner, the author of the nuisance is fully responsible for the cost of abatement. But because of all the resources involved in wildfire mitigation and because of the heavy role the fire district plays, I thought that should be different. And really it has a lot to do with the removal of dead trees and undergrowth, things like that. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Sorry, one question before we get to section 22, where I do have a few other questions. Do you, just curiosity, I saw the right of entry of the town manager. Is that legal? I mean, do we have the right of entry with the noise issue? Is that, you said it's common in all the other nuisance ordinances, but it kind of surprised me that we would have that right, the town manager or his appointed person.
The designee would almost always be code officer or a police officer, to tell the truth. And it's absolutely necessary and needed. And it is in pretty much every nuisance ordinance that there is. It's it's just because someone has something behind their house that this is not a search warrant necessarily, type of thing. I can't go inside their house, issues like that without a search warrant. But we have a right to entry on the property. What section is that? Let me,
Section 7.
okay.
there is one statement on section 7 that says, with proper respect of the occupant's constitutional rights.
Yeah. So that gives us a right if we need to get a search warrant for these things like that. I can't go to get a search warrant to see if someone's running a meth lab in their home. Or even less than that, just storing barrels of noxious something unless we have the right of entry written somewhere in it.
That's all.
I'll ask the attorney.
If it's,
If it's something that, the town manager can do or code enforcement officer.
I'm getting bad feedback.
Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so if the town manager or, code enforcement officer, law enforcement officer is gonna make an entry onto property, it's gonna be something that's thought through. I may be consulted, probably will be consulted before it's done to make sure it is proper, that it's legal. Yes, it is, and John's correct, it is in nearly every code, that this is allowed.
Carol.
Same topic, I had that question as well, Dan, and what I noticed is when we get to that emergency declaration we're going to discuss later, it refers to the town manager's ability to go onto private property. With respect to both the property owner and the town manager, who we don't want to put in this precarious situation, we might pull some language from that emergency declaration. There are 3 different points where in that document where it says that this is for scenarios when entry is crucial to avert immediate threat and no reasonable alternative is available, or something that's a little more, not restrained, but defining as to the purpose. Is that fair to suggest that? I mean, Jen's given me a heads up. I don't want to put the town manager in this awkward position either.
Well, again, if these situations, if this section is used and is taken advantage of, it is for a good reason and for a good need to go onto the property to take a look at something that could be a hazard. And typically there isn't enough time to get a search warrant. They don't happen very frequently, and it can be a situation, maybe say you have, I don't know that that's called out in this section here, but one of the codes that is, building code is a property maintenance code. And say, for example, you have a fire and you have a structure that is nearly destroyed in a fire. It's important for the town to go to that structure and take a look at it and determine if there are any structural issues that need to be protected immediately. So that would be a scenario where this right of inspection is important to protect, other citizens.
And that's where I'm going. To clarify that he'll have this right or this authority to alleviate or minimize danger to lives or property. I think it's an easy add that signals to our folks that we would take this on very carefully. Everything you said, rather than say, trust us, that's how we're gonna act. That's how what we put in one word.
Gretchen?
I would say we have about 70 HOAs in Keystone. And every set of declarations I've seen allows entry by management for safety or required. So I don't find this particularly unusual, and I think it's necessary.
While I agree with the notion of limiting right of entry, I would be hard pressed to believe a court or anything, if there was a lawsuit, would find a dog barking or some other nuisance as a threat to life and safety. And I'm concerned that if we add that clause of life and safety, it could add a significant restriction to the town manager, code enforcement, or any other designee being able to do the job. I agree with the notion of it, but I struggle that. Honestly, I don't think most of the nuisances would be life or safety.
What nuisance would be something where the town manager would need to enter private property?
Well, let me give you an example.
Please.
You have a dog that's running loose.
Yeah.
And it happens to be on someone's private property, and the dog needs to be captured and taken to animal control. They're entering on the private property to capture the dog who potentially has endangered other people in the community.
Again, it does come down to danger to lives or property. I don't think that's limiting. We're talking about the dog's life, we're talking about property damage.
Anything, any entrance into property is potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Attorney, any entrance on the property, there's always a potential that the property owner would claim that their constitutional rights were violated. I would hate to have a limitation in our code that potentially would go beyond what a court would allow, and further restrict the town manager from, or code enforcement, from going onto a property to alleviate something. It may not be a life safety, it may be something else, that a court would have allowed, under the constitutional rights of the individual.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to bring it up, but my main issue was I just want to make sure that we were legal in what we were doing, but, and if that passes legal muster on my.
Yeah, I mean, it does talk about with respect to the occupant's constitutional rights, and that's critical because we can't trump in our code somebody's constitutional rights. So those would need to be followed before entry is obtained or allowed on somebody's property.
Other questions? Then John, go ahead.
Okay, so let's start with the noise section. It's actually kind of vaguely written. It's
I'm so sorry to interrupt, John. I'm usually out of order and I apologize. But I have a question on section 8. And
okay.
I've read this many times, but obviously it's been on our agenda for many months, so forgive me for not being as sharp on it as I have been in the past. But when we're talking about a nuisance in section 8, when a nuisance is found to exist within the town or within the town's extraterritorial jurisdiction and giving 5 days written notice to rectify the situation, does that apply to the noise issues and other nuisances? I mean, are we really giving people 5 days to fix identified nuisances like barking dogs or light or unruly renters? Or am I interpreting that wrong?
Hmm. You know, I don't think you're, and I'll ask our attorney, I don't necessarily think you're interpreting that wrong.
And if I'm not, I think we need to fix it.
Yeah,
I thought we had addressed this earlier, and forgive me, I forget the exact connotation, but didn't we talk about the postal system being not super reliable, so we're gonna extend this beyond 5 days?
I don't care about that. What I'm saying is if there's an immediate nuisance, it needs to be abated. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about the fine or all that. I agree with you when we talked about that. But if there's an immediate nuisance that needs to be dealt with, I don't think we should give 5 days notice, especially in a very transient community where we have renters who are in and out and like, so long, it's abated, we're gone, our rental's up. We need people to be able to go in and deal with these nuisances more immediately, in my opinion, than 5 days.
so I think there are just looking at it, our first three things, noise, fireworks, open fires. Those are things that need to be stopped immediately. And what I think I need to do is identify, there's certainly some things that you can take your time, noxious weeds, rank vegetation, but I think I need to go back and identify certain things that will require immediate abatement upon notification, verbal or written. I agree with you entirely.
So is the plan to have a schedule almost of like these four would fall under immediate, these would fall under noticed? Well, I'm just more posing the question, I'm not advocating for that.
Yeah,
I think the town manager's gonna, and the attorney are gonna have to come up with some language that's specific enough, but also general enough to give them the latitude to deal with anything that requires an immediate response.
Kind of comment, because I was thinking about noise, and yeah, when it's a party, let's shut that thing down. But then again, we also had, I think earlier, Kindred, where somebody had a fan, it was a big machine that was real loud. And to get that turned off immediately, it would have a lot of, it'd be difficult, I think. So I do think that it's a hard one to just say X and Y, Z, and A. And maybe that you're right, have the attorney and John, they can think that through with discretion.
Aaron,
I mean, I see your point, but I actually would disagree. If you put up something that's clearly a nuisance, oh, well, it's hard to turn off the fan isn't much of an excuse. There's a difference between like immediate resolution, maybe that doesn't need to be cited. They're like, oh, well, you know, if I install a giant subwoofer on the roof and I put a time block on the thing, I could say, well, gosh, I just can't get to it until the time block goes off. Well, cool, you should probably be fined for that, right?
I think what Aaron's getting at is regardless of if there's extenuating circumstances, it's still a nuisance.
Yeah.
And so it should still be dealt with. Sure.
there are some nuisances that are gonna take more time than immediate response. And that's, I think, the issue we're trying to address here is something that can be handled immediately and something that will take time to abate. That's where the 5 days.
I totally agree. I'm just saying certain things like noise, you don't need to parse noise into like, well, sometimes that's immediate and not. But I agree with you totally, like, noxious weeds, that's not an urgent.
Right. So is that sufficient guidance in that paragraph for the manager and the attorney to give a look at the language? All right. Next questions? John, go ahead.
okay, so we'll get back to noise again. It's left fairly vague because we do have state noise statutes that have specific decibel levels, which can still be enforced. And council member Parmet, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'll let you finish the noise discussion. I'll make my question about it.
Okay. So basically, you just can't make or amplify noise in an excessive manner which can or does annoy, injure, or endanger the comfort, repose, health, or safety of others, and emits sounds or vibrations that can be felt or heard outside the property boundary. Now, a key word here is in an excessive manner. You start your car, you can hear it outside the property boundary. It's clearly not a nuisance. You start your coal roller, it might be a nuisance. But this allows the enforcement person will have to make a judgment call on whether the noise is truly excessive or if it's a common noise. I have the hours between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. We can change those hours. That's entirely up to you. I believe many HOAs have 10 p.m. as quiet hours. So this section,
Question?
Well,
So,
really more of a statement. You are correct. Many of them, it's 10 to 7. My question is, who prevails then? Is it the HOA or is it the town?
HOA would enforce HOA rules, town would enforce town rules. It would not be a potential citation if they were past 10, but the HOA could potentially take action against the owner. Now, the concern I have in here is two things. We have residential areas in town and we have commercial areas in town. 11 to 6 in commercial areas may make sense. I'm not sure 11 o'clock at night makes sense in residential areas. I would much rather see something like 10 to 7 or 10 to 8 in residential.
And I'd like to completely agree and build on that point because we have so much residential that is literally feet away from commercial spaces. And so you have to have something that clarifies what happens when the noise detection is on the residential area, it's coming from the commercial zone. And I mean, the Colorado state, I've got a couple of questions here. I assume you're referring to 2512-103 for the Colorado noise statute?
yes, I assume you're correct. I don't have it in front of me.
I think that I would be on target here if I said, we cannot use that. It's something that's totally different. It uses 7A to 7P for different decibel levels, and we need to supersede it with something that's completely ours. The county did that. We were operating under the counties. We need to do the same thing, and right now we have something that's so vague and talks about, this time to that time, but it's different than the Colorado one that falls back. And the Colorado one looks like it was written approximately 40 years ago. And I would be very happy to supply town leaders and council and staff with some examples of some very progressive and modern noise ordinances that come out of different cities. For example, one thing that jumps out at me from the Colorado one is it uses a measurement called dBA. When you're measuring sound, you have to have some sort of rule set that says this is how sound is measured. There's different ways you can do that. There's dBA, there's dBc. dBA is completely inadequate because if you measure dBA, you could have a subwoofer that is literally vibrating the glasses off of your counter, but because of the frequencies that dBA looks for, it would not be a noise violation. But, doors would be rattling and glass would be falling off the counter. That's where the noise violation would come from, I guess. But this is something that, it was fine to use dBA 40, 50 years ago when you couldn't buy a subwoofer capable of that for $250. There's also we have issues of residential, commercial, light industrial, but measurements from within a building, and we already have a comment at the start of this work session of, okay, what about the noise of the door shutting? So you have to have different standards for measuring noise within multi-dwelling units versus in a single-family neighborhood. And there's really well thought out noise ordinances that are in existence that take this into consideration, and we could adapt and adopt something like that, I think. And the last reason I think that it's really important to look at this is we need something that would enable us, we've talked about using noise detecting auto sighting cameras for violations on the road, people who either cut their mufflers off or using engine brakes. We would need a specific decibel rating that's based on vehicle type. The Colorado thing does not cover that. We need vehicle type coverage and distance from median for measurements. We need those sorts of things. And we also need that if we want to ask CDOT to put up the no engine brakes, noise ordinance enforced sign, we have to have a noise ordinance that is sufficient to comply with their requirements for that. And I'm doubtful that what we have does that. And then I ran out of things to say. I'm sure there's more.
Valerie?
I want to say ditto to everything Aaron said. I did not speak before this meeting, but all of those notes are very consistent with the notes that I wanted to hit. And I want to say above and beyond that, again, broken record, these are precedents we're setting. We need to give them the time and consideration they deserve and do them right the first time, because trying to go backwards and address them after we've already put these ordinances in place is nearly impossible. So although we've been trying to hammer this out for months, I think these need to be done right the first time.
Would it be fair for me to task the county manager to go back and, given the comments by Aaron and Valerie, to go back, give a look at this, make sure that we're using the right standards, and that we are in compliance with the Colorado laws that govern air brakes and noise as well, so that we will get the support from CDOT that we're going to need to control that, particularly the noise at 6.
Absolutely. And if I could ask Councilmember Parmet to drop in sometime or talk to me, and we can go over some of the noise ordinances he's found. That would be wonderful.
Yes, sir. I'll stop by and I'll send out some of those example ordinances to all town.
One of the other delineations I think it's important to make when we're talking about the difference in zoning, because it sounds like we're talking about zoning sound ordinances. Aspen breaks it down as far as residential, commercial, and lodging. And I think that makes a lot of sense for a place like Keystone where we have those different distinctions. So I too did research on different sound ordinances. Aspen is a little bit out of touch because they do the DBA.
So the town manager will go back, relook at this, and come back with something different. It sounds like the noise ordinances are, in the other towns, are probably standalone ordinances. And we may want to consider pulling noise out and making standalone ordinance. John?
I would just add on that, I'm not gonna say I agree 100% with everything that was mentioned, but just generally speaking, when I was looking at this nuisance ordinance, one thing that really stuck out to me in multiple sections is, and you identified it, John, too, is the broad brushstroke that it applies. And I generally like to be very specific where we can be. And I found that a lot of these, like even under section 21 nuisance is defined, we're super broad enough to interpretation. A couple of examples, right? Offense decency. Offending decency can be one thing to one person and one thing to a totally different person. It interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life property. Do you consider barbecuing offensive to somebody who might not eat meat that lives next to you, right? So there's a lot of very broad aspects of this that I don't like how undefined a lot of things are.
Dan?
I understand that 100%, but at the same time, this is gonna need a lot of discretion. I don't think, I've tried to write things like that before, and you get a lot of lawyer time and you try to nail down everything and it's difficult. So we're gonna have, I think, discretion with this. Might be.
Particularly in broad entrance type statements. Valerie?
Sorry to dominate. One of the an element of feedback I got from a community member relates to light being a nuisance. And I didn't see that addressed in here, maybe I overlooked it, but specifically in regards to in residential areas, not necessarily lodging areas, but residential areas, making sure that the lights aren't on all night, shining in their neighbors' windows. And I know the county used to have, or does have provisions that require lights to shine down instead of out. But I think that light nuisance is something that we need to take into consideration because it was brought to us from a community member.
Aaron?
I'd like to echo that point. An example is a house in my neighborhood recently installed ring floodlights on all four corners, and they trigger every single time a car drives on Hanson Road. So those lights flash on and off over 100 times a day. And it's great when they're angled down, but it's also important to remember in the winter, we have a massive reflector, and so they'll shine right up. So I think having some guidance for folks to think about that is a really good thing.
And I'd ask the town manager to consider that in conjunction with the town code when it comes to building requirements and lighting. Most towns have downward directed and all that covered on the building side, which could also be enforced by code enforcement.
But if it's pre-existing, don't we need a nuisance ordinance to address it and rectify it?
No, it could be addressed with the town code. I mean, the town code, if there's a violation in, for instance, the town community development director just walked in, and that was gonna get a question.
I've been listening.
All right, in the area of, for instance, lighting, we have requirements for, if we had certain requirements for lighting, the town, could enforce that code, could they not?
Yes, there is a portion of the land use development code in chapter 3505, maybe 17, that certainly, I'm pretty cool, that stipulates lighting standards. And while it does not say dark sky, it certainly goes towards accomplishing off-site glare and the type of lighting fixture you're supposed to have. So with building permits that come in, we look at that very issue. For instance, a floodlight would not be allowed. It has to be downcast. And I get the feeling that there might be some out there, but we address it if there's a nexus with a building permit for an existing structure. For all new structures, we certainly utilize the code.
What about an existing structure?
So that is good. It really needs to be the way I've dealt with it over the past pre-existing. Say there's a 1970s building or 80s building, whatever, and there is a lighting standard or fixture that does not comply to today's standard. What I've done in the past is made a nexus, if you will, between what they're trying to do. Say they're doing a deck or a hot tub. From an enforcement standard standpoint, I feel comfortable that I can address the ones that are immediately adjacent. I have not dealt with that issue quite yet with the town, but I would certainly work with the town attorney with regards to how far my line can reach with regards to enforcement for existing structures.
It sounds like you're saying they have to be asking to do something new, like put in a hot tub before you would be able to touch it.
Typically, that's how, in my past, I've dealt with it.
But if someone, and I've seen this in areas, they have a front light, they change that out with the new light, that created the problem that Aaron talked about, that would be something you could address.
Yes. Yes. I've actually found quite a bit of cooperation, especially with the larger, older buildings. They are periodically coming in for instance, residing. Then I feel comfortable that I can get a lighting standard that complies.
So just for clarity, if someone who owns a single family home sticks a, motion sensor, or a bunch of motion sensor, lights on that flash on and off a whole lot but point down, you wouldn't have anything you could do about that.
It would be tough. I would try to work with the property owner.
That's where the vagueness can come in and be beneficial. We can't pass a law that says you can't turn off or on exterior lights that are compliant, but we don't want lights flashing on and off 24 hours a day. How do we define when that becomes a nuisance? It's a judgment call.
And for clarity, I'm not looking for something to help me with someone in my neighborhood. I simply talk to the person and solved it. But when I see a problem like that, I certainly see where you could have a non-responsive absent landlord with motion sensor lights. And I see the problem being potential for a big problem as these cheap, bright sensor lights become more and more common.
John?
And just so I'm understanding, without a nuisance ordinance, we would have to be able to prove that the lights are new additions to a unit. Or we couldn't do anything until that unit, whether it's a large building or single family, came up for a reason to the town. We wouldn't be able to do anything until that point, unless there was a nuisance ordinance. And if there was a nuisance ordinance saying flashing lights in your house aren't allowed.
The nuisance ordinance would only supplement, my zoning powers.
Is there a negative to doing both?
Not that I'm aware of.
I hate to do this, it's now almost 6 o'clock, there's the next item on the agenda we must address tonight. And what I'd like to do is, again, defer the rest of the nuisance ordinance till the next meeting, next time we get it back onto the agenda. With your permission from the council, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion of the employee down payment assistance program.
Well, I would like to address that, and I would suggest that we address that and then return to this, because there are time-sensitive things in that nuisance ordinance, such as the fair-safe trash component that's so wonderfully written, but if we don't get this deployed in time, then the compliance dates may not be tenable. And I hate to see that another year of not having protections for bears, pets, and residents.
I can bring that as a standalone ordinance to our next meeting too.
Okay.
Just bring that as a standalone, because we're gonna have a lot more discussion. We haven't gotten to the tough ones yet.
I'm amenable.
All right, with your concurrence, I'd like to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the down payment assistance program. And with that, employee assistant down payment assistance program, turned over to the town manager.
Okay, if you'll give me a second here. Okay. So this is employee recruitment and retention policy. Many towns have down payment assistance programs for employees that allow the town to loan money to employees to purchase property within the community somewhere. As you all know, the hardest part about finding employees in Summit County is finding employees who have a place to live. And this program, I've very heavily based it on a similar program run by the town of Breckenridge. It provides that the town of Keystone can loan employees up to $100,000 for the purchase of a residence in Summit County. The funds can only be used for the purchase of a primary residence or the repayment of a similar debt incurred with the previous employer. For example, if an employer had gotten a down payment assistance loan from Breckenridge or Frisco, and we stole that employee, these programs have kind of a the interest rate jacks up if you leave work with the town, and it does in our program too. This wouldn't allow us to not assume the loan, but give a loan to pay off a down payment assistance loan that had become untenable because the employee left their previous employer to come to work for us. The way this is written, program is not allowed for employees who have more than one developed property, and it must be for the employee's primary residence. So they can't use this to buy a house to VRBO, or can't use it to buy a house so they can VRBO the house they're currently in. They can't buy a house and rent a place. They have to live in the place that these funds are used to pay for. The way the draft is written, the terms of the loan are for 20 years at 1% APR. If the employer leaves their position for any reason, whether voluntarily or their employment is terminated, there are acceleration clauses that call for repayment of the funds immediately, or depending upon the situation, a significantly increased interest rate. If the employee sells their residence, the loan is immediately due. This loan would be a second lien on the properties behind the primary mortgage. With the limited number of employees at Keystone, we don't anticipate that this will cause any serious impacts on the town's finances. And I guess we can kind of go over the plan and see if there's anything you want me to change. If you're interested in creating the program, let me know, and I'll prepare the ordinance and the related draft legal documents for future consideration.
But it have to be an ordinance, there could be a resolution.
It could be a resolution. It could be a resolution, actually. Finances can be done by resolution. So,
Questions? John?
Thanks. How does this align with I know you mentioned Breckenridge being a primary starting point for this draft. How does Dillon, Silverton, Frisco, Summit County, other government players in county that are not Breckenridge, how are they similar, how are they different, how are they related?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said, John, or council member Hagna.
Oh, you're okay. My question, I turned up my volume, so is this better?
Yes, yep.
Thank you. How does this program, which is primarily based on Breckenridge's, relate to other government players or employers in the county, Dillon, Silverton, Frisco, Summit County, et cetera?
It's all the programs are very similar for these employee down payment assistance programs. I just felt that Breckenridge's was the most complete example, so I was able to use their program as our primary draft program. But there aren't very many differences. The employers or communities that have it all have similar acceleration clauses, similar interest rates, similar restrictions on use. The one difference between this and other programs is our use of this program to pay off a loan that might exist in a similar program with a previous employer.
Okay, understood. And then, do other towns offer the same housing benefit that would be included in a compensation package for a town employee?
I am not sure about that. I do know many other towns actually have specific housing set aside for employees.
So this, the monthly stipend could be a way that our town has addressed the housing issue without having dedicated housing like other towns do.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't believe that. As I looked at, when we put that together, the intent of that was to have something on a line item on a pay stub that they saw that would incentivize an employee not to leave the town. This is also a recruitment effort, because if I'm looking for a new job, I'm looking at the total compensation package I'm going to get, and I may actually take less in basic pay salary, because I know I have the $500 a month coming in on the other side.
And that's exactly how I understood it too, when we were going through, the HR consultant and all that. What I'm trying to get at here is, are we double dipping, right? Are we offering a benefit that another town, let me rephrase that. Are we offering two benefits that are trying to tackle the same thing, whereas other towns are only offering one of those benefits?
Other towns pay higher compensation. And this is our housing stipend we're not just hiring people who are from Summit County. We attract applicants from everywhere. And this is just the stipend is an acknowledgement that there are differences in cost of living in Summit County. And this stipend is the indication that you as a council recognize. Are you there?
No, yeah, we're still there.
Oh, okay. It looked like it froze up for a second. I don't necessarily think this is double dipping. This is just the second step. The stipend encourages someone to move to town. It helps them offset their rent. This encourages someone to set down roots and become a permanent part of the community. I wouldn't see it so much as double dipping as encouragement to become permanent members of our community from here on out.
Councilmember Davis?
I would like to encourage anything we can do to help recruit and retain staff. And since housing is a major issue in this county, I think this is something we should seriously consider and move forward with.
Any other comments? John?
I know, it was mentioned that due to the limited number of employees of the town, there's not an anticipated major impact on the budget. Could you work us through what the limiting clause or any kind of limiting factor on this would be? What happens if we have 10 town employees that all want this at the same point? Is there a limit on how many can receive this, or a limit on the impact it could have on our budget?
Could the town attorney address that?
Well, you can, at one point, you can always repeal this. You don't have to offer this benefit in perpetuity. So should there be a need to grow significantly, that this would become a financial burden on the town, then you consider either revising this or repealing this benefit.
Other questions? Then can I get a thumbs up or thumbs down whether this should go forward and be presented to us as a resolution at the next meeting? All thumbs up. There's your guidance. It's now 6:05, and what I would propose is, first of all, at a minimum, we need to adjourn for dinner because it's sitting out there getting cold. The second question is, would you like to adjourn the meeting instead of just a recess, come back at 7 o'clock for the council meeting, or would you like to do a recess and address additional items? Councilmember Barnett?
I would love to adjourn, but I feel like we're behind and we should get it done.
All right. Then,
Why
Don't
don't
hate
we
me.
continue the nuisance one? Because that's gonna take a good amount of time.
well, I don't think we're gonna get anywhere close to completion of the nuisance one in 30 minutes.
Are there more items on
Yeah.
our agenda that we could
I feel like we just have work we should be doing.
Yeah, I think we need to go to the emergency declaration, then the business licensing.
Sure.
And then if we have time going back to nuisance, because it's gonna take a long, nuisance is gonna be extensive. So with that, we're in recess, let's say for 20 minutes, and then, come back with food, and then we will begin again and run till 7 o'clock. And so, the next item, let me have, John, are you still on?
I don't see him.
I am still here. Yep.
All right, let me ask you a question. And the question is, discussion of the draft ordinance, on emergency and local, disaster authority. Do you think we can get through that in about 20 minutes?
What does Jennifer think?
I think we can, it depends on your questions. Really, yeah.
All right.
What's the other one? What's the other item?
Business license, business licenses. All right, now let's go ahead and do the, I'll call the meeting back into order. And at this point, we'll go on to what the next agenda item was, which is a discussion of the draft ordinance on emergency and local disaster authority. And with that, I'll turn it over to the town manager and town attorney.
And I will let our town attorney, Jennifer Madsen, take this.
So what you have in your packet for the work session item is a draft ordinance that provides for authority really for the town of Keystone to act quickly in emergency and local disaster situations. What the ordinance does is essentially delegate to the town manager actions that typically the town council would need to take by meeting, and delegates that authority to the town manager to act quickly in emergency situations. Under the draft ordinance, the town manager can declare the emergency. The town manager would have to provide notification of that declaration to the town council. There's a procedure for the town council to, that emergency declaration would last for 7 days unless extended by the town council. Town council could extend an emergency declaration either by meeting or by providing consent to the town manager through emails or other means. So it's kind of a unique situation in that you don't have to meet to provide that consent to continue the emergency. And that's important because there may be situations where it's not practical or possible for you to meet during an emergency. The town manager in that emergency can enter into contracts that would be above his authority under the purchasing policy, change regulations to provide essential goods and services. And all of these actions would be provided, would require ongoing reports from the town manager to the town council. So that's really an overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
John?
I generally really liked the framework and the flexibility. We all lived through COVID very recently and saw how these measures were utilized in areas that we might have lived in. The only question that I had for this so far was that framework for incapacitated or absent town manager. Do we have any, and I know that succession policy would be defined later, do we have any idea on what that looks like. I think that that'd be important for us to understand, because the town manager in this position does have a great deal of authority. And being able to see that succession plan, I think would be important too as part of this process.
I believe, Article 7.2 of our charter lays out the responsibilities of the town manager in the case if the town manager were to be, that's why I'm questioning whether we needed to have that included in the ordinance.
Okay.
Because that portion of the charter lays out that the town manager, anytime the town manager leaves the town for any period of time, they have to appoint the person acting for the town manager. And they also lays out the process that if that doesn't happen, the process for the town, that position to be filled, which immediately would devolve to the mayor to make the appointment, and the council has 7 days to then, they could countermand that decision in 7 days.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, God forbid an emergency happens and our town manager is no longer here, or is incapacitated, then it would fall to the mayor to either appoint.
If he was incapacitated at that time, or not here, the town manager should have already, according to the town charter, appointed the person who is acting in his stead.
I'm imagining an emergency where something catastrophic happens and that town manager was not able to appropriately follow that process. Do you have a process where some person can be either assume the responsibility or be appointed the responsibility of, like, it's very important responsibility?
At that point, as I read that paragraph in the charter, the mayor has the responsibility to appoint a member of the staff that will fulfill that role.
Understood. Thank you.
Gretchen?
Under definitions, there's deputy town manager. We don't have one. Are we ever gonna have one? Do we need to change that wording?
And yeah, and that's, I mean, really consistent with John's questions.
Yeah, it relates.
And so what I would like to do, hearing this feedback, is revise that definition so it's consistent with the charter. And I think that letter really would take the place of that administrative policy. Essentially, the letter is the administrative policy designating the session, and there wouldn't need to be a deputy town manager.
Yeah, I would just take that language
Yeah.
out since we don't have one.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
I was, the idea of, getting this body out of the way is great. That's what this really does. But then it also talks about controlling public access, traffic, evacuations. I mean, that's in conflict with a lot of other people that think they're doing that same thing. I mean, the police, the fire,
Please work for the town manager.
the fire,
They
the
have,
county. I mean, how does this, I mean, obviously, this is gonna be part of a bigger plan. And if the intent is to say, get the council out of the way, I agree 100%. I just recognize that this is a much bigger thing than just that.
yeah, technically within the town is responsible for those things. Fire, yeah, there is a fire district that the town manager would be working in conjunction with. But you would want the town manager and the fire district working together, not the fire district working unilaterally. Because that could be the counter to other things that are happening in the town, according with the same thing.
Yeah,
Hey, John, and let me ask, I'm speaking for the town manager. John, why don't you answer the question?
Yeah, actually, I have experience with this. What happens if you have a multi-jurisdictional emergency is, and Councilmember Thisted saw this in the active shooter practice we went to, there'll be set up an incident command post. And depending on the type of emergency, someone will be put in charge. But that person will need authority from all people. It might be a fire person, it might be a police officer, it might be the town manager, but everyone in that incident command post will have to have authority to act kind of unilaterally. So there'll never be a question of, there will be a question of who's in charge, but that's the first question that's answered in these types of emergencies. And the rest of the chiefs and managers all will know their roles in these emergencies and all have to have the authority to commit resources or commit to take other actions. For instance, the shutting down roads, opening up roads, things like that, they need town permission. I need to be able to give that right away, or I need to be able to make that decision. I just don't anticipate there ever being a real conflict of who's in charge of this situation. Everyone at the top level understands how these work and can figure that problem out relatively quickly. There will, believe it or not, still be conflicts and miscommunication. But the people at top know what they're doing.
You understand kind of what I'm saying is, it looks like you'd be doing everything, and the reality is, the main thing in this document is the council's giving you power to represent the things the town needs to step up to.
And what it really does is that, you all have your authority to take certain actions. The town manager has authority to take certain actions. And really it just expands his scope so that if he does take actions, he's not acting outside of his authority.
And I understand that, when you look at all the things, he's gonna direct traffic, he's gonna bring in the airships to dump water, that's not he's gonna do the things that we would have normally had to do or approve, but we're given that.
Yes.
But that's what this does, I'm fine with it.
Yes.
You have something, Carol?
I do. To that same point, I would recommend that in the top, when they talk about notifications, county level, it says notify the county clerk. I would recommend we add the county office of emergency management, maybe even replace, because that individual will also have that role of coordinating and deconflicting among many agencies. So, those are the last people I would not want to know. Someplace in the top.
It's 3A.
I apologize.
It probably should be, instead of the Office of Emergency Management, the county sheriff who's responding as the Office of Emergency Management works.
Is he the guy who can coordinate?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. He's in the response business. He'll know who to talk to. Yeah, I agree.
He's the guy in charge.
If the
Second,
wildfire, the answer is yes. In
So-
other areas, it may just be the county.
that's true. I have a few, these are kind of happy glads. There's a point where we talk about these emergency rights. Guidelines will include abatement and cleanup. Do we really need to consider cleanup actions as part of the emergency by that time? You would think that the town council will be back in business. I don't, you're not in charge of this, but just
Yeah.
bouncing it off of you.
Yeah, I think that this is the type of ordinance where my recommendation is to be,
Roger's better?
yeah,
Okay, I'm good with that. Third point, at the very end, talks about, I'm sorry, I don't have the section number. It talks about when council is back in business, council can amend, cease, or reverse. And the way it says, amend, cease, or reverse effectiveness of any action. I'm sure that's not what we want. We probably want to reverse the effects.
okay.
Just a typo. And lastly, could you explain the terminology? I wasn't sure. Sometimes it was talking about a local disaster article, local disaster. What does the article mean in that sense?
So I've labeled this, as we're working on these ordinances, it's a little challenging because typically when we're working on these, we have a code that we're putting these ordinances into. So I've labeled it local emergency or local disaster article.
To go into the bigger code?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
One question I had, was under the declaration, where the town manager issues that declaration. Right now, we say the town manager needs to basically convene the council, I believe, within 7 days. I would like to see something, a requirement in there as well that said something like the town manager has, put a requirement, require the town manager to call an emergency meeting of the town council as soon as practical. Recognizing, so it may not be 7 days, but it may be practical for the town manager to get a hold of the council sooner than that. My concern is not to direct, to cause, to countermand the manager's direction during this critical period. But all of us are going to be getting potentially calls from the press. And we've seen that in Los Angeles, where mayors or council members are caught unaware of things.
Or in Africa.
Yeah, and so it would be nice to, as soon as it's practical, not to impede the operation of the town manager, but to just get us involved as quickly as we can, so we understand what's going on.
Right.
This is good and very important.
So, is there anything else anyone would like to have considered in right now? All right. Is that enough guidance for you to deal with, Jennifer?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
All right, we've managed to get through that one. At this point, it's 5 minutes to 7. We have 6 minutes to get ready for our next meeting and interviews. So with that, without objection, I'd like to, we'll just defer the rest of the agenda up to a future date, and I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Is there any objection to adjourn the meeting? The meeting is adjourned.